So I'm looking forward for this platform and the discussions where I can learn more and be a part to add some value. Thank you.
Thank you, Anamoy. And finally, we have Alex Wolfram. And Alex was introduced to us through John. Alex, are you there?
Yes, hi everyone.
Hey, give us your intro. We're so thankful that you're here.
So I actually was classmates with John. We met in Asia, and while he kind of went more the the political route, the investment route, I went more of the business route. I stayed in Asia for over 10 years and worked with a lot of Chinese companies doing business in China, or excuse me, doing business in the US, and also US businesses doing business in China. And so I oversee a lot of supply chains, do a lot of product research, and do a lot of customer retention and sales work for different types of companies in different sectors. I also run my own tea company called Chifo Life. So I actually try to get in the ground as much as I can, from everything on the direct consumer side of things to the B2B side of things, to really understand supply chains and China's challenges in the US and US challenges in China.
Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you all for being here, you guys. Like, this means the world to us, again, that we are having an important conversation about important issues. And we have a collective conversation. We got Thunderbird students, we got people from Shanghai, we have people from Minnesota who are continuing their work, and we got, John, you're from everywhere. You're from Phoenix right now. Like, we're all working together on this, and we have a room full of people who care about this issue. And so we want to continue this conversation. So let me just dive in really quickly. Oh, and we got Tate. Sorry. Tate is the rock star of this entire show. Like, this whole thing happens because we have students who are amazing, who are thinking about these things. And Tate has just been my partner in helping make all this happen. So thank you, Tate. But I think what we want to do here is we want to just continue this conversation about how we think about U.S.-China relations, but also, again, focusing in on how we think about this, not just as a general thing. So one of the things that's been a gift for me in coming to Phoenix was, I thought, and this was back when I was a professor at NYU, I was like, oh, the big job for me is going to be a dean of a business school in Washington, George Washington University. And it was cool, but it was just like so Washington. It was just like so like, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? Like, this is just like, okay, whatever. And then so whatever, I did that job. I also, had a hard time with the ending of that job. And then I went to work for Apple, and it was a gift to work for Apple and to work for Tim Cook, although it kind of broke my heart in some ways. And I'm happy to talk about that, but it was hard. And then I come to Thunderbird. And here I am, still thinking about U.S.-China relations, but in the state of Arizona. Really? And it turns out, again, this is one of the most interesting places. And so for those of you who have heard me talk about this before, and forgive me for repeating this, but I just want to tell the story because it's one of my favorite stories. So in December of 2023, my first time back in China in 4 years. So we were in COVID, right? COVID for 4 years. I couldn't be in the place where my heart lives for 4 years. So I come back, and now I have a new identity. I'm Thunderbird ASU professor, right? And so one of the things is that people are like, oh, ASU, most innovative university in the world, blah, blah, blah. Great. But it was also so interesting because I do work on second and third tier cities. My whole goal is to help people understand China, but not the Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhens of the world, but like, have you ever heard of a city called Zhenjiang? Right? Anybody ever heard of Zhenjiang? Couple people, right? Okay, so I was out in Zhenjiang, and one of the things I'd love to do is interview directors of departments of commerce in these second and third tier cities, because they are what I think of as local governments as industrial firms. Like, they're entrepreneurs. These are the people that are driving. So the whole, and we can go into later, the whole thing of like why I think neoclassical economic theory and all of our economic theories of economic change have got it wrong. And by the way, China is going to be the most powerful economy in the world, bar none, within the next 5 years. It's going to happen, right? And I know a lot of officials, I've been told by the State Department, I'm no longer welcome there because I've said that. But it's true, right? And there are reasons for it. And so I love to go talk to these people, these directors of the bureaus of commerce. And so I went there, I went with my research partner, and this guy knew everything about ASU. And he knew everything about Thunderbird. And he knew everything, and he was just like, blah, 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 and you do this, and da, 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 and what we need from you is this. It was weird. Like, it wasn't just like I had been researched. I was like, so I left with my research partner, who's a Shanghainese guy, and I was like, was that weird? And he was like, yeah, that was weird. What I didn't know, and I feel very stupid for having not known this, is that Tempe and Zhenjiang have been sister cities since 1989. Of course he knew. He'd been waiting for me since like 1989 or whatever he took his time. He'd been waiting for like somebody from Tempe to come and talk to him about, and I was like, oh, okay. So, but this is the really interesting thing here is that this isn't Beijing, Washington anymore. This is Phoenix. What's the sister city of Phoenix?
Chengdu.
Thank you. Yes. So this is Phoenix, Chengdu. This is Tempe, Zhenjiang, right? And, you know, to go on the conversation we were having yesterday, John, this is what is Chandler doing? What is Gilbert doing? What are all of these smaller places that are building up the Phoenix metropolitan area? What are we doing? Right. And so there's a really interesting story here that is about local economic development, that is about the greater Phoenix metropolitan area. And so there's Phoenix, there's Chengdu, there's Zhenjiang, there's Tempe, there's all of these areas. And so we've written about these issues. Now, just to go quickly through some of this again, I think we're in a difficult space. I'm scared about this space. I think we have built, you know, a dynamic in this space that I'm not proud of and I'm scared about, right? And I want us as scholars to be thinking, what does this all mean? How are we doing this economic development? And so what are the real issues here? The real issues are what I just said. China is going to be the most powerful economy in the world within the next 5 years. Now, I know people get nervous when I say that, and like, I don't think a lot of people in this room, because you're all self-selected to come into this room, but when I give those kind of talks to political pundits, they're like, what are you talking about? Right? What? China is messing with the numbers. It's not actually what's happening. And I think the indictment here is not just about the ways in which China is perhaps messing with numbers, but I don't think that's actually happening. What I think is happening is that we have made a decision in this country dating back 40 years. Neoclassical economic theory. I'm a student of the University of Chicago. I was there. Milton Friedman was wrong. Right? And I know that's blasphemy to say that Milton Friedman, Ronald Reagan, neoclassical economic theory, we were wrong. Markets are not the best arbiters of economic growth. They're not. They are the best arbiters of how to transfer wealth to rich people. I'm sorry if that sounds too political, but that's the story. Is that what we have seen in this country is the largest transfer of wealth since 1980 till now. 38% of the wealth that went from the working and middle class up into the top 5% of the U.S. economic landscape. That's what happened, right? Now, I'm a good capitalist. I went to work for Tim Cook and Apple. I loved it. I learned more than I ever could have imagined working for Tim. Wow. But make no mistake about it. China didn't steal our jobs. Apple went to China because China was more effective in creating innovative manufacturing supply chains than the United States was. And Apple could benefit from that and became the most profitable company in the world. And Tim Cook became very rich because of it. Which is fine. Good for him, right? But this is not a story of China stealing jobs. This is a story of complex manufacturing and complex manufacturing supply chains, right? And so what I want to do now is, as we think about the next phase, how do we attract that capital back? And how do we build those complex manufacturing supply chains in the US, right? So John, I see you nodding, and I want to stop talking because like this is what I want to hear you, Paul, and Anamoy and Alex talk about. Like, how do we build these complex manufacturing supply chains, right? This is what's interesting to me. And so what I want to do is I want to make sure we have time to hear the voices of our experts here and less about me. But that's the key thing. Is this particular session is like we are at this critical point, U.S.-China relations. We are at a critical point of attracting capital from China to the United States. Or we could like shut the doors, fine. But I think that's wrong. I think the real important approach to this is 合作伙伴, collaborative relationships, right? But in order to move forward in this, we need to think about how do we learn? How do we attract capital in an effective way that allows us to learn from the TSMCs of the world, the JA Solars of the world, right? A number of other players. And just to be clear on this, we got Paul and Alex and John, who are all China experts. We also have Anamoy, who is an Indian expert, right? And so we're thinking about how to really build out these issues of manufacturing supply chains and the attraction of capital in a very collaborative way. That allows us to think about like, what is the next phase, not just for U.S.-China relations, but for Arizona, for Phoenix. How do we continue this path of Phoenix holding this position of not being the fifth largest economy in the world, but in the U.S., but the largest, the most powerful. It's a fascinating time. Okay, so I want to move over to our panel and thank you guys for being here. But I also want to just create a culture where we are all in these town hall meetings. We're having collective conversations. So this isn't about us lecturing at you. This is about us having dialogue, okay? So, John, you're the most senior guy in this panel, and so forgive me for doing this, but can I put you on the spot?
Sure.
Do you have any thoughts that are just off the top of your head on what we're talking about now and the direction you want to go, please?
Yeah, so I think, as I think about Phoenix and I think about China and I think about where we are going, first off, unfortunately, what I feel like we're caught in the middle of right now is the tariff game, right? And I don't think that anybody really wants to watch tariffs play out. All that ends up doing is, can you hear me now? Trying again.
There you go.
All right. Erase everything I just said because you didn't hear it. So we're caught in the middle of this tariff game back and forth, right? And we saw recent, tariff increases again that we're going to see in 2024. Let's be real. The tariffs only add cost to consumers. And a lot of the time there is, it also decreases innovation because what we're doing is fighting back and forth instead of really developing partnerships. But where I like to focus is thinking about foreign direct investment. And that's where I spent a significant portion of my career. How do we encourage companies to invest in places? How do we attract companies? How do we, have companies come from overseas and invest here? And, these are the things that, when people transfer over to a new culture or a new country, we do see a lot of incredible, as I was mentioning earlier, interaction, right? I think my friend Alex here is a great example of this. He mentioned his tea, Chifu. Like Alex and I both lived in overseas for quite a number of years together. We were really good friends. Alex, when he was overseas, really picked up tea as something he really loves. And he's very humble. What he won't tell you is that the teas that he has sourced through China and Taiwan are the best teas that many people have ever tasted, right? And so what I want to focus on is when we move and we transfer and we live somewhere else, when we grow those interdependencies, we also grow an understanding of each other's cultures. And what's the first thing that you do when you meet somebody, right? You sit down, you shake their hand, and there's a dance in between the two of you to try to find something that's similar, right? Well, when we have two countries that are so far across the world, it's sometimes hard to find those similarities. But when you have somebody that has experienced, say, fantastic Chinese tea, right, then it's easy to grab onto that and to start to bridge the gap. When we bridge the gap culturally, we drive so much more innovation, so much progress and improvement around the world. So my focus on this is, how do we drive that from the business, right? If we're trying to drive culture and improve people's standards of lives and understanding each other and how they work together and how they can become friends and develop relationships, how do we go to the core and pull businesses in so that we can expedite that, right? And for me, when I look at what businesses want when they expand, there are three aspects that I'd like to focus on. One, labor, right? It's really important for a company that is transitioning and moving to a new economy to have a labor force that they can tap into for whatever operations they have, right? A second thing, while labor is really, really important, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. You'll have to bear with me. It's also incredibly important for companies to be able to. Wow, I just like completely.
So let me just jump in, because I love where you're going on this, John, and I love what you're saying, but I want to hear from other people. But you just raised two really, really important issues, which is where I think you were going. So if I could just take on. So one is the importance of cross-cultural understanding. We just don't do well when we think like, we're America, just you want to come to America, be here and be like, actually, there's a tremendous amount to learn from places like China and India, right? So cross-cultural understanding. And a place like Thunderbird, by the way, we teach this stuff, right? I was going to say we teach this shit, but like we teach this stuff, right? Right?
Absolutely.
But the second thing that you were going to is, we have to understand how labor forces treat each other and how management and labor are different in places like Taiwan and Arizona and China, and right? And so like, if I could just take those two pieces, those are both amazing, important parts, right?
Thanks for giving me a second to jog my thoughts there. I appreciate it. So the other areas that I want to talk about too are customers, right? As a company, one of the most important thing you might argue is where your customers are. And number three is supply chains, right? So as you're talking through these, as we're thinking through what kind of companies do we attract, the interesting thing about China, and Doug knows this incredibly well, is you can focus in specific areas of the country that really have clustering similar to what we do, right? And so as we think about economic development and investment attraction, we don't want to attract an automotive company to a location that has absolutely no automotive investment, right? And in one of my former careers, I used to talk with mayors and with economic developers, and every now and then we'd get a mayor that would come and say, I want to be the center for automotive production in the United States. Like, okay, so you have tire manufacturers? No. Do you have any kind of automotive manufacturing? No. Let's take a look at your economy and see if there might be another area that we can focus on to try to develop, right? And so what Phoenix has that's really incredible, as Doug was mentioning, is these supply chains and these manufacturing that is already establishing here. And so how do we leverage that is where I'm really excited about, to make sure that we are bringing companies that can really foster economic growth and drive innovation. And in the end, drive cultural cooperation.
So I love it. Cultural cooperation, labor, thinking about labor and manufacturing supply chains, but also consumers. Now, I'm going to continue to push this point, John, so I'm going to come back to you. I want to get to some of our other panelists, but it is so important, A, And John and I and the team were just at a meeting yesterday, and we were talking about, people kept talking about business development. And we were saying business development and economic development. This isn't just about how do we create money for the executives of the TSMCs and the JA Solars of the world. It's how do we create jobs, right? How do we create economic development? And so that's a really important part of this. So I don't want to lose that, right? But I do want to come back to this issue. I just, I get very upset when I hear that China is just cheap labor. It's stealing jobs. Actually, this is the most innovative manufacturing supply chain in the world, hands down. And so we were going to come, and Anway, I'm going to come back to you on this point, but before we lose our team, I want to jump online to Paul Dye. And then Alex, we're going to come to you, and then we're going to come to Anway. So Paul Dye, talk to us, my friend. You're in Shanghai.
Okay. So if you're talking about a more innovative supply chain, I would say that probably so gradually we are feeling the same thing as people that are doing business actually here in China locally, because sometimes when we have our providers all across the globe as well, in Europe, for example, and sometimes getting a sample from them is more difficult than we expected. Because we're used to the case where we were able to find all sorts of providers of basically anything within the vicinity center of industrial cluster.
And I did find out I can check in early. We checked with the people.
Sorry, Paul, give us 1 second. There you go.
No problem.
Keep going.
Yeah.
This is just the new world of conferences over Zoom. That's what we got. Okay. All right. Go, my friend. Go.
I think that's one of the unique, because so I have my partner that is taking care of more of the day-to-day supply chain, but I'm more on the side of new product development. And for new product development is actually a super sometimes super demanding for supply chain, because you want to be able to find someone that is willing to provide to you while you're experimenting on something that might not turn out to be profitable eventually. But you still need someone that is willing to do that for you. And I think China is doing a great job in this regard. And people just have that kind of trust or confidence that if they provide you with continually such an easiness of developing new products for their customers, eventually they're going to profit from it. So we have providers, for example, having machineries, really 50 meters long machineries, like printing machine, and worth millions of US dollars, I would say. They just leave the machine there, and they just tell them that you're going to go there and experiment with whatever, and then they just let you do that, run that on their machine for free, and not until you actually develop something that you think is going to be accepted by your own customers, they won't charge 1 cent from you. So it's just like a free experiment ground that is provided by your supplier. And I think such mentality is very helpful. And for smaller providers, sometimes you just try to get 1 or 2 pieces of a certain thing, and they need to run the machine for maybe heat it up and then cool it down, and for maybe 1 day, and you just make 1 or 2 pieces for you for experiment purpose, and they're still willing to do that. I think that's kind of like credit system that right, it's not official, but it's between people and people, which is I think it's extremely helpful in terms of I'm just giving a small angle towards the issue of
Oh, but it's a small angle, but it's beautiful. Like, thank you, because like there you are sitting in Shanghai at 7 in the morning and telling us what you're experiencing about manufacturing supply chains, and if I could be so clear, innovation, right? Like, this is amazing. So thank you. And we're going to come back to you, but Alex, are you there?
Yep. So I tend to enter this discussion kind of more on from the perspective of what I hear when I go with owners of companies to and from China. And to give you an example, this past spring I was back in China, took a company, and they're a multi-billion-dollar company in the U.S. They develop truck parts and train parts, and they desperately want to bring back manufacturing into the U.S. And we went over there with a committee of scientists, engineers, all with master degrees, PhDs. And I'm showing them the manufacturing facilities where a lot of their parts are made. I help them oversee a lot of that stuff. And until now, the past decade, they have been trying to replicate at their own facilities how to make all these different parts. And they're actually still not able to do it with their best and brightest people. And they're up against, and the reason really being is because the manufacturing over in China is 10, 20, 30, if not 40 years ahead of the US. And the experience has become just absolutely invaluable. And so that knowledge transfer is a very, very hard thing that the US is facing at the moment when bringing some of those manufacturing back into the US. So then I asked the Chinese companies, I say, what would you like out of this? If you were to bring some of those facilities back into the US, what would seal the deal for you? And it's almost always incentive based, really, at the end of the day. And they need an ecosystem to work with it. In China, if you do something like an oil seal, as an example, you have the upstream component, then you have the downstream component, which is basically saying, it starts with materials, right? It comes down into die casting, then it goes into manufacturing, then the actual end product comes out. It's not just as simple as building a factory. There's a whole ecosystem that has to be built around it. And so you have to really bring the whole ecosystem with you and teach people how to do that. And in turn, that actually creates the jobs here. But those companies are really looking for, economic deals, tax incentives, whatever it may be. And I always say to you, different companies here, look to the future. What can you bring? What do you anticipate 10 years from now? What is the sector that you want to see invest in that you think can actually succeed? And can service and start from that rather than trying to look backwards in terms of what you could bring back, because it's going to be very, very difficult either without a high incentive base or a high, something along the lines of like taxes and so forth.
So, Alex, thank you so much for that. That's amazing. And if I could embarrass you, John, and Paul for a minute. So for the students in the room, guys, look at what these people are doing. Like this is like so fun and so exciting to think about what the opportunities are out there, thinking creatively about going deep in an area of knowledge and then advising companies about how to do this, right? I mean, right, John? Like that's what you grew up in your career and did, and that's what Paul did, and that's what it sounds like Alex did. Now, Anamoy, I'm not going to you just as the student because you are still a student, but you've also done this in your career. But Anamoy brings to us the comparative framework, right? So he's not a China expert, and he was very clear when I asked him to be on this panel. He was like, Doug, I'm not a China expert. And I was like, Anamoy, but we need an Indian expert, right? And so like he said, okay, I'm with you. So Anamoy, I'm going to put you on the spot. Don't feel like you have to talk about China. What we're talking about is innovative manufacturing, supply chain development in general, with respect to the space that you know, and you have been a guy who's just managed lots of these logistics with India, but pushing ourselves to think about like, what does this mean? If we want to create these opportunities in manufacturing supply chains in the desert, in Phoenix, like what are we going to do? So Anamoy, on to you.
Thank you, Doug. So I'll explain in terms of my expertise what I faced in India and how I see China, my neighbor, but I still see them as the best country when it comes to innovation and technology. So that is how I relate my life, my experience, and want to learn more. So if I see, I work for the green energy solar industry in India, where the government was a complete support with their conglomerates in the manufacturing for solar panels. And then also we had to wait for around 90 days to get the panels. The same solar panel, when I source from China, I get it within 10 days. So that showed me that the kind of production, so that is because one, the quality is very high, as well as they have support with all the small businesses and SMEs in India to give after support services. So for the target for if I see China for India is the middle class family, is the largest population wise, and that was the perfect target for them. And for us also to look at China, I get the material at a faster time, at a better price, and also have support for after sales service. But when I saw the parameters about the green energy and Hawaii, China is the largest producer of solar panels in the world. It's because of the significant investment in their R&D and the modern manufacturing facilities. The manufacturing facilities are not even modern, they are far intelligent. AI, IoT, blockchain, digital twin services, because I was working with one of our geolocation companies, so I was looking at research. So the digital twin technology was in automobile, where now the companies in China have used it for factories. A small forklift company organization has 52 companies and is planning to open up 120 more in next 2 years, all run by remote control. So as well as when I see logistics, so China is highly advanced and well developed in terms of high road railways, good connectivity, and modern ports. In India, we have progressed now since Make in India campaign in 2014, brought by the BJP government. But since then, we have seen a far more change in the GDP, as well as that has opened doors for foreign investments, FDIs. The ease of doing business, now India has gone up, and that is strengthening the economy also on the other way. So companies are not only leveraging the people down in our country, India, helping us by sharing knowledge, by where we are now producing the manufacturing parts, and now the multinational companies are exporting this material from India to the other parts of the country. So that is how that, like, it's a win-win ratio for the country as well. But generally, when I say like the one belt and one road China plan like 10 years ago, today in a decade, they have captured 140 countries through that network. That includes 75% of the world population and half of world's GDP. So being the neighbor in China, I always think so, like we are part of the same continent, almost same weather. What keeps us short in terms of technology, and why can't we be one of the best? So that always drives me, motivates me to think about the larger economies.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anamoy, and thank you, John, Paul, and Alex. We're going to continue to come back to you guys as the experts, but here I want to do something that's important. I do have my 3 takeaway points, and I'll be happy to give them, but I want to be clear. When we have these conversations as Chinatown halls or as group discussions, I want to engage the audience. So I want to just take a pause here for a minute and hear if there are any voices. Anybody excited or offended or angry or want to just jump in? Your own expertise?
I just have a question.
Yes, please.
It's probably open-ended, but we don't, I guess, in America, we don't send our people to get trained to learn the way they manufacture, because they're brilliant. Why don't we do? Why don't we send more Americans to get educated in China on manufacturing? They are by far superior than us in the manufacturing. What is the leg on that, or the thought process behind that?
So, and I want to make sure, Carrie.
Yeah.
Carrie is not a plant for me. It's to speak highly of what Michael Crow has done. But it's a great question, because if we concede the point as a group that China has developed the most sophisticated manufacturing supply chain in the world, and by the way, again, and this is me beating my head against the wall and saying like, no, it's not just about cheap labor. And again, this is, Anamoy can, I think, affirm this, right? This isn't a comparison between a country of 1.4 billion people over here and 1.4 billion people over here and lots of cheap labor. No. What I experienced at Apple was that China had developed over the last 40 years the most sophisticated manufacturing supply chain in the world. And they've done this through their relationships with ops engineers at places like Apple and Tesla, right? Okay. So the question is, Carrie, if I understand you, why aren't we sending people to do that, right? And the short answer is, I don't know, but the bigger answer from an educational perspective, this is why, again, I don't want you to seem like a plant for me answering an ASU question. I was fascinated. So when you have a joint venture relationship of educational institutions so that you can get independent degree granting status from the Ministry of Education, you have to have a partner institution. And so I remember when I was doing this for NYU, this was in 2001, and we had a partner organization, which was the Shanghai Normal Edge Teachers College. And the Ministry of Education was like, no, no, you need to be with Shanghai Jiaotong, right? And so we changed our relationship, got Shanghai Jiaotong, boom, boom, boom. Because in China, there are these universities. There's the C9, which are Beijing, Tsinghua, you know, all of the top universities. And then there are the C40, and then, so, okay, Shanghai Jiaotong is number 15. We'll do that. So when I was reading what Michael Crow was doing, and suddenly our relationship was with the Shanghai University of Engineering. Where are they? Where they're here, right? Like I just wasn't clear on like what we were doing, but it turned out that Michael Crow and Rick Shangra and all these people, they thought this through, and they were like, no, no, no. The big question is, how do we educate people on, and here's what is the big thing. So thank you. You're not a plant, but thank you for asking the question. Here's the big thing. So if you want to build a complex manufacturing supply chain, you have awesome engineers who are the brains of like how to build blah. And then you have cheap labor. But you also have to have vocational technical education, right? And in the US, we actually used to be pretty good at vocational technical education, but we've gotten bad at it, right? And so the interesting thing is, like, if you think about tiers of labor, you have the corporate owners and the managers, and then you have the people who are, you know, doing the menial labor, and then you have vocational technical education. What China has been so good at building in the last 40 years is voc tech, right? They've built vocational technical education school, right, Richard? Like they've built these, right? Even in your field, right? And understanding you can't just have people doing sewing machines, you like have to have people who are like manning the lines, right? And so like they've built the infrastructure for vocational technical education. And so what I was impressed with Michael Crow was like, oh, this isn't, you know, this isn't just how do we build like the present so that we can be training the next future leaders. This is how do we build voc tech. And I think ASU's relationship with the Arizona, John, is it the Arizona Department of Commerce that gave Arizona Commerce Authority, they gave 17 million to ASU to think about voc tech. Like this. So I think your question, Carrie, is great because like I think we need to be thinking like, how are we thinking about this? It's not just like cheap labor and the engineers of the world, but like who are the mid-level voc tech people? And most universities have shied away from that. But I think ASU is embracing that. Like, am I right, Richard? Like, I think like that's.
Generally, I'm not real clear what ASU is doing.
But okay, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think like that's the thing. Like you have to dance between all of these levels, right? And so to your question, Carrie, I think we need to dance between all these levels. And
But it has to be more than one university. We
Fair enough.
we can't produce it by just one university or one city. I mean, we have to do this across the country.
well, I hear what you're saying. So you're arguing we need to not just have one university, but we need to start a social movement. Yes. And here, I don't mean to put,
Well, it's more of an economical. I mean, if we want to be in the manufacturing business and be successful, we have to be able to do that.
yeah. I think that's
And
true.
we've shied away from it because they say it's labor cost, but it has some bearing on it. It's more technical.
Yeah.
Because labor, we can move people.
We can move migrant laborers. Can we train the vocational technical? And so I don't mean to put our panelists on the spot, but John, Anima, Paul, Alex, any thoughts?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So back to the FDI lens, foreign direct investment. This is the beauty of foreign direct investment, right? Because when a company expands from one country to the next, they bring those best practices with them. Oftentimes, they'll take engineers from their home country to train people in the new country, right? And so, I don't know. I work in finance, right? And so one of the things you learn when you leave your education, you go to your career, is all that stuff that you learned in books was fantastic, but it means nothing in the corporate world, right? And so there is so much on the job training. And to me, what I really get excited about is, 15 years ago, I was doing a tour of a company in China, a manufacturing plant. And keep in mind, this is 15 years ago. We were just starting to have automation conversations, right? And we were walking down the assembly line, and they had two stations across the aisle from each other. One was the traditional manufacturing. A guy was there, and he was, putting the widget together. I don't even remember what it was, but across the aisle, they had already installed a machine to do what he was doing. And it was fascinating. I took a video of it because he went from one side to the other, and you could see how fast the machine was moving and how it just didn't stop. It didn't take breaks, and it was doing things that this guy was, it was taking him a lot of time. And it makes you really start to think, when we have the capabilities to automate like that, is perhaps the next level of investment coming in really about that type of innovation. And so what you're doing is having more of, as Doug was saying, the high-end workforce that is fixing the machines, that is managing the machines, that is working on the operational flows from machine to machine for assembly. And that, to me, when you have a powerhouse like China that has been doing this for, as Alex was saying, they're 40 years ahead of us on that, we won't catch up. But we can have investment come into the United States and catch us up. I mean, that was the playbook, and I'll pass back to Doug on that one. That was the playbook China had, right? When they opened the borders, they forced companies to do joint ventures in China to drive innovation into China and learn how companies started to, how they built things. A big one when I was in China when I was young, I remember before cell phones were over here, I was over there in the mid 90s. I'm dating myself now. But all of a sudden, this was 1994, and those Motorola flip phones were everywhere. Everybody had them in China. And we didn't even have cell phones in the US. We're still like carrying car phones around, and plugging them into the lighter. But that's because of the innovation that was driven because they had joint ventures. And so my thought is, why don't we just copy that, pull innovation into the United States by bringing companies here who know how to do it best.
So I want to hear from everybody on this panel, but I want to hear from the audience. But like the one thing I'll say, and I'm going to just shut up because I'm talking too much. But to your point, John, I think we have become too arrogant in this country. I think we have not thought, like, how can we learn from places like China and India? And, Anna might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think China has been more aggressive at doing what our model is about local governments and industrial firms, building political culture of manufacturing innovation, blah, blah, blah. But I think we've become too arrogant in this country, John. And we've thought, we got this, we know. And we don't, actually. We're way behind China in terms of innovative manufacturing supply chains. And so I'm gonna stop there, but like anybody else from the panel? Anamoy, Paul, Alex, yes.
I
Anamoy,
might just
exactly.
add a couple of
And then we're
points.
gonna go to
So I
Paul
totally
next.
agree with what John said, because in my country also, the Make in India campaign had not been a Make in India in 2014, we won't have been the fourth largest GDP in the world. So it was open doors for foreign direct investment, companies coming up. Like when I was working with multinational companies, it not only I learned the product and services which I need to give, but ultimately I changed my organizational structure also. Like the way of my compliance changes, the way of I deliver my things changes, because I'm learning from those companies too. If I can learn from a company, and country can also learn from a country. So it's because of the improvement and also fostering collaboration between industry and academia is must, which I believe, which my country lacks right now. Like 50%, I would say, but we are more not into practical. The more we go into practical, I think so we'll be one of the fastest.
That's beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, this is we're continuing to develop the interactive dialogue amongst these things. I want to invite you guys, but we got Paul Dai over there in Shanghai at 8 a.m. now. Paul, any thoughts?
Right, right. So I think when Doug, you said something about cheap labor, I was actually contemplating these words. I think it's both yes and no. It's not cheap labor in terms of the way that we look at the U.S. labor versus China in terms of like per hour is cheaper. Not just that, but there's the other issue that is, I think, has more to do with a cultural ingredient in this entire recipe, which is that I think so China, although so this is funny. So China is the largest, the strongest industrial country in the world. But in the meantime, I think because we've been going through this process so fast, and culturally, still people don't think that industrialization is the thing. So it's a little bit difficult to describe, but I think what I'm trying to say is that when you think about a industrial town in the U.S., all these laborers going to work every day, they work, but this is their lifestyle. This is their way of working. They work there, they get paid, and they have their vacation and start it over the next year again. And because this is it, I think this is extremely important for them to get paid fairly, or they don't work overtime, and they make sure that they're kind of respected by the culture, or they have their labor union. They have to be paying extra attention to things like those, because this is it. This is their lifestyle. This is all they have. But here in China, it's a different case. Even if for someone that has been working in a factory for 10 years, I don't think they think this is their lives, that they're going to end up being a industrial worker. They still have their families living in the countryside, and they have their land. When they become old enough and they have enough savings, they just go home and start a small business, or in the countryside, or build a little house for their family. And they don't have to bring all their families to the city either when they start try to find some work in a city. That's why you don't see slum houses in Chinese cities, because when someone goes to a city, he just brings himself there, and then his family, 3 or 4 people or older, his parents, they're basically kept in stability by the land. So they have their own farmland, then they can support themselves. Although it's not an industrial kind of life, but that's enough to sustain lives. And then the government makes sure that their kids get educated and healthcare as well. So they just go to the city themselves, and then they don't have to get paid that much to support themselves in a city just as one person. So I think these are just very different mentalities, and that's why I think the Chinese workers sometimes they're just more willing to work longer hours, because they don't see this as the end status of their life. This is not it for them, and then they have something else to look for, consciously or unconsciously. And that's why it's okay for them to sometimes work, overnight, or when the factory is going through hardships, they're sometimes willing to take a down pay, or it's just not that, strict labor union type of like against the owner of the factory. That's kind of environment. I think that's something that is also quite interesting, or behind this resilience of this Chinese manufacturing. I'm not sure if I'm giving this clear.
Paul, you were brilliant as always, but let me just add one thing to the thing that you just said, because what you argued about, and forgive me for this room if I'm lecturing on my own hobby horse, but like what you were arguing about is state market relations in this process. So John, when people come from Liaodong Renkou and they come over to a place like Shanghai, they're given housing by the state, right? And so like there's a whole process in which people don't have to figure out like, how am I going to go make money being either a low-level employee or a mid-level employee, because like the government has actually figured out how to move people around in employment spikes, right? So like, let me, my own experience, I experienced this with Apple. Like we were trying to figure out how to help Foxconn and Zhengzhou deal with the fact that most of the year they needed 800,000 Apple employees. But 2 months out of the year, they needed 1.6 million Apple employees. So what do? Well, the Zhengzhou government figured it out. Like we got housing, so to your point, Paul, it's a closer governmental corporate relationship. So you have the Foxconn Zhengzhou people, and then you have the Zhengzhou government, and then and like people are figuring it out, like, okay, we got to move you people around. That's okay. But in America, because we have this distinction between governments and markets, we don't think about like, how do we collaborate on this, right? I see you nodding, John. Is that, you agree?
Yeah, I agree with
Okay. So Paul, I think you make great points, but I actually think this is part of the innovation of the Chinese system. Right? I don't want to keep talking. Alex, over to you.
Well, okay, on the note of the Chinese system, one thing I think that China does very well is just thinking ahead, right? And so actually utilizing its policies in relation to economics into industries and actually planning to see, okay, what's going to be relevant in the next 5, 10, 15 years, and how can we stimulate those sectors of the economy? How can we inject capital? How can we really be of support to those industries in the future? And then doing it through, again, whether it's any sort of kind of tax funding, economic funding, and really just trying to make those sectors really interesting and cool, for lack of a better term. I think there's a little bit of a stigmatism, with manufacturing being kind of this low end type of work in the U.S. But manufacturing itself is such a powerful thing, and we saw how fragile the U.S. became too, throughout COVID and beyond. When you don't have that it really is in the U.S. best interest to really plan for that, build an ecosystem, work with Chinese companies, attract that investment, and learn as much as we can. Because to the question earlier, yeah, the biggest difference between, again, those PhD engineers and the factory owner who barely has a high school education is the experience. And so if you don't work towards trying to gain that experience and bringing it, then it's going to be very hard to compete.
Oh my God. Like Alex, Paul, John, Anamoy, like you guys are like, you're the reason we're here, is we're here to listen to you guys, like amazing. I want to make sure I'm respectful of everybody's time, but like any other comments, thoughts, questions from the group? Yeah, please take.
So I'm really grateful for the wisdom, and I'll just like repeat back what I've heard. When we've talked about how do we create an ecosystem that grows and supports manufacturing, it consists of, incentives, an industry and academic connection, cultural competency and curiosity, resilience of the labor force and honoring the work that they do, and long-term strategy. So those are just like the key points that I've thought of or I've listened to. And I'm curious, as we're sitting here in Phoenix and we're attracting these manufacturing, the sector, what are some of the largest barriers that we're going to face as a community, and how do we think about that and address them earlier on rather than waiting for them to hit us in the face?
So, hey, thank you. That's a brilliant question. And again, I want to continue to develop this dialogue with the screw. So, I think, John, you laid us out with a very good dialogue of like, if I can remember it correctly, but it was like thinking through about like the details of economic development, and then cultural aspects of economic development, and then sort of thinking about supply chain labor. But hey, I think you're coming back to the question of culture, right? And cultural flows. Aaron, I hate to do this to you. Can I put you on the spot? Because like you're a rock star in this space. And if all of you don't know, like, again, I don't mean to embarrass people, but this is a guy who, correct me if I'm wrong, but like he grew up in LA, then moved to Phoenix, and then like went to live in China for like 10 years and like became like a cultural attaché. And so tell us about cultural flows.
Yeah, very happy to be here and to see so many people involved with this. Definitely something I'm very, very passionate about, and know people who are involved. And, last time I was here, I mentioned India. I think India is a huge part of this whole circle between the three of us. Since coming back, I've done a ton of work with the Phoenix sister cities. We're currently looking at India being our next sister city and looking into what sister city that's going to be. So I'm really excited to see, this coming into the topic. It's about China, but it's about the world. It's about U.S. It's about what we're all doing together, and what we're doing separately as well, and how we can come together. But these conversations are awesome. So often I feel like such an optimist. So in some ways of being a bit of a pessimist, like it's weird because I know a lot of people who have done business in China who struggle to transfer any of that to working in US, and then are hungry to go back to China. I definitely can feel that in a lot of ways where work with the American Chamber of Commerce in China, the European Chamber of Commerce in China, but then doing things within the state of Arizona is a lot slower, so I want to know, how do, I guess, Americans in America work more with China? America, if you're a foreigner in China, you're going to be approached daily. That's just kind of a given. There's going to be opportunities. But what do like, I'm someone who's very much been trying to get into it. There's a lot of people who have no idea that that's even a possibility. So I guess what is there for people to get more involved? That would be one of my questions, or a conversation that I would like to hear. Also, like, everything's always business. I'm very much involved with culture, and I feel like that's how countries really kind of get intermixed, when you're interested in their culture, when you're interested in the people, the history. I think those are the true connecting factors. Business is come and gone all day, every day, in every country. But I think once we're able to hopefully connect culturally, I think that's a big thing that I also hope to see as well. So.
Thank you, Aaron, and sorry for putting you on the spot, but by the way, my friend here is a little bit humble. He's not just a cultural guy, he's like the docent for the Phoenix,
Yeah, Phoenix Art Museum.
the Phoenix Art Museum, but like, the guy's real, like, he's like, no joke. But to his point, and I think this goes back to John's first point, we need to think about all these things. We need to think about U.S.-China relations as it matters for like what it means for Phoenix economic development, but also how does this work? Okay, like how does it work culturally? How does it work in terms of labor? You know, so culturally, we have work to do. Labor, we have work to do. Like, you know, the unions are mad, right? They're mad. And we gotta like help work with why this is so important. And then, you know, there's also the innovation piece, right? This isn't just about like cheap labor and like how do we build the manufacturing supply chain here that was in China. Like there's actually very innovative processes that are going on here. So let's figure it out. Okay. Okay. Alex, you have been so kind and so gentle to be here with us. I'm going to put you on the spot now.
Let's do it.
Okay, so tell us like reflections on this. You know, you gave a great presentation about how what we're talking about here relates to your work. What are your thoughts? Like, how do we develop the next stage of manufacturing supply chain in the United States, in Phoenix? You know, I know that your specialization is in a number of different industries, including tea and other things that, but like, what, give us your deep thoughts about how do we structurally do this?
So the cost is the biggest factor that I've heard time and time again from Chinese companies. So coming over to the US, built just not only just the factory cost itself, but then the actual ongoing management and so forth. So I think what's missing, what's incentivizing for those companies is not only some sort of funding to help kind of get those efforts off the ground, but trying to help them build the right factories in the right place to help feed a certain demand that we perhaps lack. So then they can, you know, actually grow their business and then build the ecosystem here and get people actually hired, you know, in the US to then start learning those skill sets that we're talking about. So,
Wow.
you know, if it were me, I'd be looking at, you know, where do we want to see Phoenix in the future, Arizona, and what sectors do we feel are important, and how do we reach out to those companies to help them determine what is important to them, what do they need to help succeed here, so that we can bring those, you know, some of that talent back here to succeed as well.
So thank you, Alex. I have to admit, thank you. I wasn't expecting that from you because like, you know, I've come to know you very recently through John and like, but like, yeah, the focus on sectoral analysis, like, and John Lee, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but our conversations about, this isn't just about TSMC and semiconductors, this is maybe also about JA Solar and photovoltaic. Like there's interesting stuff here, right?
Yeah, one thing I can add on is the chamber recently did a seminar. So basically a very simple, very easy, very basic stuff for the how to help Taiwanese company to apply and obtain contract license. And a large number of Taiwanese contractors working on the job site right now without the contract license. So very experienced. So very precisely trained and just do very high level, high quality job, but that don't have a state license, but just have to complete the plan on time. So we did a seminar, helped them to get a local license. And it's very simple, very basic thing to a lot of people here, but it's very much needed for them. So I think a lot of things like this look simple, but really we can work, we can engage, and we can help.
Amazing. Thank you, John. And again, just so all of you know, John is our host. Like we're together working with this and Thunderbird and Ardeen Charla Gregory Brown is our host, but John has also been a tremendous host in working through this. Jerry, you have a question.
Well, I think we all learn from someone else. You don't learn from yourself that much. So free flow of information is what's important. And if you envision every company or every university is working for the world, you're not working for Phoenix or Arizona or America. You're working for the world. I'm going to sell my cars to the world, or I'm going to sell my technology for building a car to the world. So the whole world benefits from my technology. And I kind of get this idea because the National Institutes of Health gives money to universities all over the world and research centers. And they all send their research reports back to the NIH. And then the NIH publishes those, so the whole world knows the latest innovative technology in all these healthcare issues. So if, in a way, to get government out of the way and get manufacturers and business to start being willing to, like I say, there's 100 car manufacturers in the world. How about 100 engineers from each of those companies, say once a year, get together and really talk pretty much in detail, this is how we do it. And then, again, then everybody benefits from that and you get a better car, lower cost car. I think the talk of labor to me is a little bit of a cop-out to America. We're about technology. We're not about people standing on a manufacturing line going like this. I did that in college in a cheese plant, and whoa, did I hate that. We're about technology. So how about developing the technology so I can move that cheese back and forth with a machine more efficiently than the cheap labor in some other countries?
So let me jump in, Jerry, because we're getting close to time, but I love this point because I just want to highlight
And
it.
one other is, so ASU maybe could become one of those centers of technology transference.
Yes, 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 yes. And let me just like wrap up here, but I also want to give all of our panelists one final word. But here's the final thing, Jerry, because I think you raised a key issue. Yeah, it's all crap. It's all bullshit to talk about cheap labor. That's not what this is about, right? This is about building sophisticated manufacturing supply lines that reward people for very innovative work that they do. Now, this is the reason when I go into this, like Doug Guthrie, like, the neoliberal who hates Milton Friedman. Yes, because in 1980, we opened the doors and we said, so we're angry that Apple moved its supply lines to China. We opened the doors for that. Like, that's what global capitalism did. That's what we encouraged them to do. And by the way, I was very operative and supportive in helping Tim Cook and Apple managers figure out how to navigate their manufacturing supply lines with the Xi Jinping administration. That's what I did, right? We did that. We said, go global. But the thing that's interesting is that under Apple, and there's a book that's being written by Patrick McGee, who is, he's a Financial Times author and great guy. He's writing a book about how what Apple has given to China is probably the biggest investment that has ever been given to a foreign country since the Marshall Plan. Like, it might be that, right? We've done that, okay? Which is fine. But the point is, how do we bring it back? Right? And so the bringing it back is not just a question of cheap labor. The bringing it back is about creating innovation supply lines and innovative education that really develops this process of discussion, right? And so what I want to argue is that the thing that's interesting for Phoenix right now is that we have U.S. China relations. and this complexity. We also have TSMC and that important relationship. And then we also have JA Solar and that important relationship. We have many players that want to be a part of the US market, but the US needs to step up, right? And so let me give it my 3 key points. These are my 3 takeaway points. And I see not only do we have our group that we wanted, but Kay is a Berto wants to jump in. He has his hand up. But local governments as industrial firms. All of my work in China about what has made China's economic development so effective is local governments are engaged in capital development. I want Phoenix to be learning from the Zhenjiang government. I want them to be engaged in a way that we have just not been engaged in economic development. So this isn't governance versus markets. This is governance together with markets, right? Local governments as industrial firms. Andy Walter is my favorite China scholar in the world, and he is the person who has thought this through. 1995, most famous article. I love that. Building a political culture of manufacturing and innovation. This is not about neoclassical economic theory. Let's let the markets decide. That approach was taken by Jeff Sachs and Janusz Kornai in the Soviet Empire, and it was a disaster. What we need to do is think through like what China has done that was in a different approach to that, and we need to work with them. Okay, and the third that is the most interesting, in my opinion, is the migrant labor issue. I know it's terrifying for us in this country to think about migrant labor. But actually, migrant labor has been a channel of development for the Chinese economy. So we have the migrant labor force, which is 300 million people, but we also have the vocational technical labor force. And in the US, we haven't dealt with this, right? And so I think we need to work with it and figure it out, okay? Now, we're at our time, and Kay Izquierdo, jump in.
Hello, sir. My name's Kevin. I used to live in Japan for 9 years, and I live in Kazakhstan now. And I have a few questions on how to move around with China and its growth. I was working in the Navy, and I was working in South China Sea in the 2014, 2013, 2015 period. I was getting chased by the Chinese ships when they were doing the 9-dash line. One of the questions that comes up always is about China's control of and devaluation of its currency and how America can tackle this. I'm not even sure if it's 100% true, but if, as you say, it's not about cheap labor, it's about supply chains and that they are better innovative in this way. Does the fact that if they devalue their currency, does that have anything to do with us losing the trade war? Or is there, I'm a little bit not suspicious, but the idea of bringing manufacturing back, yet we all understand that manufacturing pays less in the developed country. So I understand that the idea is to bring manufacturing away from China, not back to the USA. So which is the correct terminology? Are we trying to bring manufacturing back to USA or away from China to nearby countries?
Kevin, thank you for that. It's a great question. I have answers for it, but I don't want to take up more airtime. Other comments from the group? And Kevin, one thing I would can you do me a favor and just text Kevin my contact information? So Kevin, we will get you in contact with me because I have some thoughts on this. I don't want to take up my views on your view with airtime, but let's just talk. But going over to John. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if they're mutually exclusive, right? It's not like taking away from one, building to the other. I mean, keep in mind, I just watched economic growth, right? And so what we're talking about is furthering economic growth. And so I would even venture to say not to think about it as one, a single winner, but more of a win-win solution, right? Because it's about helping companies access local supply chains that are closer to their company, their customers, right? And that's growth. A company wouldn't just shut down a plant in one place to build a plant in another, right? I mean, they're growing. Companies are always seeking to grow. So that's my initial thought.
Amoy.
As John always said, so I do believe joint ventures will be a massive support in terms of development, in terms of intellectual, as well as the development of the CT2. And I do request institutions to tie up more vocational training for engineers as well as general management. If we do have a very good curriculum in Thunderbird, but we also expect more of technology driven so that we learn and we can implement and be a part of this economy.
Beautiful. Thank you. Alex, over to you.
Yeah, I would just emphasize the partnership component. I know like it sounds almost as if, we're talking about sounding the alarms and that type of thing, but it really is about fostering that joint ventureship and really trying to, build communities, interact with China, build those relationships, and not viewing it, as a threat, rather as an opportunity, right? So, and learning from what we've seen them, how they've succeeded and how we can help them succeed. So it really is mutually inclusive in terms of, viewing this as a opportunity to grow and to have everyone prosper versus it being a combative kind of stance.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alex. Paul?
I believe understanding each other would influence people's judgment. So I believe culture exchange is still the key here. For those who have never got the chance to visit China yet, I encourage all of you to come. You are very welcome to Shanghai, to Beijing, and to the rest of China.
So I just have to say as a final word, first of all, thank you to our panelists. My God, John, Anamoy, Paul Dai, Alex, like, oh my God, like it means the world to me. It moved my heart that we are all in this conversation together. This is an important conversation, guys. I hope that comes clear. I'm not here, John's not here, Anamoy's not here, Paul, Alex, we're all giving our time. We believe in this moment, but you also are here because you believe in this moment, okay? So what I want to throw out just as the final word is, let's all go have a post-exec, experience, but let's just remember, we're all in this discussion together, okay? And so you got John, Anamoy, Alex, Paul, we're all in this conversation together, but we're all about intellectual engagement. And the final person that I'd just like to thank is John Lee. Thank you, John. Well, our partnership has just made this so that we can have these conversations. These mean a lot. Now, one thing I'll say before we end, we're going to do another event 5 weeks from now because we need planning time, but we are going to engage people at the LA consulate level, and we're going to be continuing to have this conversation because we believe, first, it is so important to think about U.S.-China relations right now. Right now, U.S.-China relations are at a critical point, and we believe this, and we know this. Second, it's so important to think about what U.S.-China relations mean in terms of a theoretical, but also analytical approach to understanding this. Third, Phoenix, for interesting reasons, is ground zero for this. Guys, we are at the center of this moment, okay? So we want you all to continue to be our partners in this conversation. We're going to have another event. The next event will be, we haven't set the date yet, but it's going to be 5 to 6 weeks from now, mid-September, and it's going to engage the LA consulate. And so I want to just thank you all for being a part of this, and thank you all for coming. Any final words, John and Tate?
Thank you so much.
Dr. Guthrie, Guthrie, thanks for all the guest partners and all other contributors in person and online. I think it's a great event. I learned a lot. I do believe this is very important. This issue is more important before because since not that good right now. Also, I think the political situation in between the countries are getting worse. I think this is why this conversation is even more important. I do believe it's much more important than my personal retirement.
Right. Well, just to your point, John, like, we can play a role in this important relationship right now, us in this room, okay? And so we're gonna do that, right? Right? All right, Tate, you have the final word.
Updates for the next event. We'll be on Foreign Policy Initiative, LinkedIn, Instagram. Really grateful you all are here. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much. And let's just hang out. Okay.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, John. Monomoy, Paul, Alex, thank you guys. And Vivian. Hi, Vivian.
I'm not from Seattle.
How are you?
How are you?
Very nice.
This is good. Anything other than that.
Thank you so much.